Hello and welcome to American Friction, the weekly US politics podcast out every Friday. I'm Chris Jones. No Jarv this week. He's off for his birthday. Isn't that nice? He's probably off vampire hunting with his other goth friends or something like that. But hey, happy birthday, Jarv. But don't fear, because everyone's favourite, as everyone keeps telling us, and rightly so, is here and ready to pod. Of course, it's Rolling Stones' Nikki McCann Ramirez. Hello, Nikki.
Hello, Chris, and not Jarv.
Yeah, fuck you, Jarv. No, I mean, happy birthday. Happy birthday, Jarv.
Happy birthday, Jarv.
Have a great time. Love you. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's break some ice, shall we? It's Crimbo party season.
What?
We've just had ours. It was great. Although I had a peanut butter milk stout that I'm still tasting 24 hours on. Not sure whether I enjoyed it, but maybe I did. Not sure. Anyway, what's your least and most favourite thing about Christmas party season?
Is that what a crimbo is?
Crimbo, yeah, it's Christmas. It's
Crimbo.
Christmas.
Oh.
Yeah, Crimbo. So you must have read that in the script and thought, what the hell is he on about?
What the hell is a crimbo?
Crimbo.
It sounds
Christmas.
like, what's the Nordic...
Asbo.
No, Nordic creature, like Crumbus?
Krampus.
The Krampus.
Yeah,
It's
the
a Krampus.
evil Santa, I think.
Christmas party season, my favorite thing, oh my gosh, probably like the spiced wine.
Mulled wine.
You want me to show up to a party, offer me hot spicy wine. Delicious.
I'm not a massive fan of mulled wine. I don't
love
get
mulled
it.
Wine. Oh my
I
gosh.
just leave wine as it is.
No.
Wine's good as it is. You don't need to heat it up. You don't need to put cinnamon in it.
I mean, you could say that about like any alcohol. You just like cocktails, like a cocktail in general, like mulled wine is just a wine cocktail, and it's warm, and it's nice and chilly here in DC right now, so it's very cute. My least favorite thing about Christmas parties, workplace parties where I'm not allowed to get too drunk.
Right. Okay.
I think it's my God-given right, especially with work, because it's
Yeah.
it's work.
I would say that's not really a thing here. In England, we get pretty trashed. Although ours was pretty sane, pretty tame, I'd say. But my favourite thing is probably just watching the bosses get drunk. It's
Honestly, ideal.
Yeah. Least favourite thing, walk home afterwards. It's cold and you're drunk. No one wants that. It's horrible.
See, the nice thing is at Rolling Stone, if I do go to the Christmas party, it's up in New York, so they like put me up in a hotel and stuff, and then I can just like...
Life of luxury. Anyway, shall we get on with this episode?
Let's do it!
Good stuff. Well, on this episode, we'll discuss Trump's first TV interview post-election with NBC News' Meet the Press. He's vowed again to make massive changes, but what harm will those changes cause the American people, and does he actually have a plan for anything? And Nikki and I sat down with Latif Nasser, writer, presenter, and host of WNYC's Radiolab show, for a conversation about how goddamn awful the Electoral College system is or isn't. Welcome back. You're listening to American Friction. Right, before we begin, if you listen to us every week, we really can't thank you enough. And we want to keep going for as long as we can, but we can't do it without your help. So, if you've got the means, why not head over to Patreon by searching patreon.com/American Friction. There's a link in the show notes. You can get episodes ad-free and bonus content all for as little as £3 a month.
Subscribe or I ban Yoda from the show. No, I'm kidding. The Black Friday sale is still running. If you sign up for a year, you can get 20% off a yearly subscription. Plus, you can give a year or request a year as a gift if you'd like American Friction to be your Christmas gift from someone. Just in time for Crimbo, a word I recently learned. For Crimbo.
Yeah, just in time for Crimbo, that's right. It's the longest Black Friday sale ever, it must be. Anyway, let's get on with it. Donald Trump's first TV interview since winning the election took place earlier this week. He sat down with Kristen Welker of NBC News' Meet the Press, and it didn't really disappoint, or it did, depending on your point of view. The interview started off on the economy. Kristen Welker asked him whether he could guarantee that under his watch, prices and the cost of living wouldn't go up for ordinary Americans. He said he couldn't guarantee anything, And then he started talking about tariffs, which he said, his words, was the most beautiful word. Nikki, why does he keep talking about tariffs? And does he sound like he has a plan for the economy?
I mean, technically he does have a plan. That doesn't mean it's a good plan.
Yeah.
I think there's like a two-pronged issue here. The first is that he doesn't actually understand how tariffs work. And I think he likes talking about them because they sound intimidating. Tariffs, as a lot of people understand them, are often used as like a punishment for a adversarial government that has angered a country in some form, or is just being unjustly penalized for their political ideology, i.e., like, you know, there's tariffs, I think, on like Russian goods. There's some tariffs on Chinese goods. It's usually used for a government you're not very happy with to like de-incentivize them from doing something. You typically don't level major tariffs against your trade allies, particularly major regional trade allies like Canada and Mexico, because fundamentally a tariff is a tax that is paid by a consumer. You're saying if an American company wants to import this good, they have to pay a certain percentage in taxes on that good. Companies don't say, oh, well, you know, we love our customers, so we're just going to pay that like 20, 30% ourselves. No, they raise the price of the good by whatever the percentage is and make the customers pay it. So yeah, if you're implementing broad-based taxes on Mexico, which like is probably the United States' biggest trade partner, but like so much of the produce and food and manufacturing that comes into the United States is coming out of Mexico. Those products are just going to get expensive. Trump has been campaigning on, you know, eggs are too expensive, bacon is too expensive, groceries, they're so expensive. Implementing tariffs, particularly on Mexico, is going to be really felt in grocery prices. That, I think, is what the Americans will first notice. And he actually said today in another interview that he can't guarantee that he's going to lower grocery prices. That came out today. And then I think the second thing here, I kind of already touched on it because I said it was a two-pronged problem, is that I think he thinks and he hopes that the threat of tariffs will bend other countries to his will. And, you know, we saw it with President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico, who a couple weeks ago when Trump said that if Mexico doesn't get border crossings under control, they're going to implement like 25% tariffs against Mexico. And she came back and said, you know what, do it, we'll match you. We will implement like retaliatory tariffs. So he's also just starting off the term in a little bit of a tug of war between like world leaders that are theoretically American allies.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure at one point he said that he'd use tariffs to literally stop wars. Yeah. At one point as well. It seems as though he thinks tariffs might actually be his biggest weapon, but actually doesn't understand that the weapon that he wields and wants to use it incorrectly if he does use it, which is going to make everything worse, which I guess, classic Trump.
Because also, if you're trying to stop wars, the thing you're typically looking at isn't tariffs, it's like sanctions. It's like forced economic penalties where you're like seizing assets and blocking travel for like government members of a state that's acting up. There's a big difference between leveling like preemptive sanctions against a country to try to avoid a bigger conflict and implementing a tax that's going to be passed on to consumers because you think it's going to piss off a country.
Exactly. So that's the economy. We've touched on that. What about mass deportations? Because we've heard so much about mass deportations prior to the election, and it seems to continue. He keeps talking about it. He's adamant that he can do exactly what he set out in his campaign, even though a lot of what he says that he wants to do is based upon data that doesn't exist. What did he say in this interview on mass deportations?
Yeah, and before I really jump into this, I think I have to caveat with the fact that this is the first like major interview Trump has given since he won the election. It is on Meet the Press, which is a very mainstream show. It's a Sunday show that gets like a pretty decent amount of bipartisan viewership. So he's not speaking as if he's speaking to supporters at a Trump rally. In a way, at like watching the entire interview, it almost felt like he was kind of trying to moderate a bit and pull
Right.
back on some of these promises. That being said, you get these, like, here, wait. That being said, you cannot listen to what Trump says in this interview without, like, taking the overall context of everything else he said and made a promise. If you listen to him talk about immigration and think, oh, like, well, he's, like, making concessions here, he's not going to do all that, I have a bridge to sell you. My caveat out of the way, he did essentially say that these mass deportations are going to be expansive, but it has to be done. He said he will start with criminals, but slyly hinted, he didn't say it explicitly, but he hinted that after they deport all the convicted criminals, which are sort of their first priority, those waves of deportations are going to continue and they're going to be widespread. Because, like I said, I think he's trying to walk this tightrope between making sure he doesn't piss off his base by going back on things he already promised, but also not scaring the normies. He put out some really weird contradictions. He reiterated what Tom Homan said his incoming borders are about deporting families together. And what they mean by that is families where the parents are undocumented, but their children who were born in the United States are American citizens. They're essentially saying, well, yeah, you know, like, we're not going to do family separation anymore, so because family separation was incredibly unpopular during Trump's first term, so we're just going to deport families together, even if they include American citizens. At the same time, he told Kristen Welker that he was willing to work on finding a path to citizenship or a path to, like, concrete extended legal status for the Dreamers, who are the children of undocumented immigrants who are also undocumented, but were brought here to the United States when they were very young. So they've been living here their entire lives. They've only really known this country as their home. And it kind of started during the Obama years where these Dreamers became a really contentious point politically because, you know, what Republicans were arguing for was deporting thousands of young people who were brought here as, like, infants or toddlers who'd never really known their country of origin. So you get those contradictions where it's like, okay, you're saying you're going to deport American citizens because their parents are undocumented, but also you're saying you're not going to deport some undocumented citizens because they were brought here when they were children and it would be politically unpopular for you to do so. Like, again, you can't really take him seriously. And you can't listen to, like, a mainstream interview like this where he's clearly presenting a front for a mainstream audience and not weigh everything else that he and the people around him have said about setting up mass deportation camps, rounding up people, like, fixing laws so they can sort of implement stop and frisk style policies on people who they suspect might be undocumented to round them up. So I'm skeptical of a lot of what was in this interview.
It feels to me that these contradictions are happening because he's put out so many statements of intent, especially when it comes to mass deportations, that these things are going to happen, but no one's really thought through how policy is going to work to make any of these things happen, and also how popular that these new policies that they will have to bring in will even go down with the American public. So he's kind of trying to pull back on some of the statements that he's made in the past, but also stay on the same line. And it's all just become very confused.
Yeah, and to be clear, he also said in 2016 that he was going to grant amnesty to the Dreamers. That never materialized. Like,
yeah.
And, you know, I think he's pretty incoherent on a lot of his policy positions. I think another thing that was really clear to me throughout this interview is he's putting a lot of the blame for these policies, or the potential blame that could come down the line if they're implemented, on his cabinet. He was essentially saying at several points in time that, I think at one point Kristen Welker asked him about, you know, his plans for, like, prosecutorial retribution against his political enemies. And he kind of said, oh, well, that's going to be up to, like, I don't have any feelings about that. That's going to be up to Pam Bondi and Kash Patel. And then at another point where he was talking about, he was, like, spreading he was spreading misinformation about vaccines and the conspiracy that they're linked to autism. But then he was like, oh, like, that's what I think. But it's going to be up to, RFK Jr. and Dr. Oz how they handle it. So you can already see he's leaving a lot of the actual mechanisms and enforcement and, by extension, the burden of blame for if and when these policies go wrong or draw backlash on the people around him.
Yeah, he's absolutely spreading the blame, which I'm not surprised.
Yeah, not at all.
There's a lot of his policies that clearly aren't going to work, and a lot of people know that already. / the policies are just impossible to implement, and no one knows what they'd be anyway.
Yeah.
On something else with immigration, though, he's hinted at stopping birthright citizenship. But he can't actually do that, can he?
I mean, constitutionally, no. But when has the Constitution ever impeded what this man does? It's pretty explicit in the 14th Amendment. I can read it to people.
Please do.
14th Amendment, Section 1, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein which they reside. The point in that clause that Trump and his administration are trying to argue allows them to repeal birthright citizenship for undocumented migrants is the little bit that says, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The thing is, the framers made it abundantly clear that that clause applies to, like, ambassadors and foreign dignitaries, like people who are in the United States from another country on, like, an official diplomatic or ambassadorship mission, and their children, if born in the United States, can theoretically become citizens. Undocumented migrants, regardless of their immigration status, are also under the jurisdiction of the United States in this country. Like, they can be arrested, prosecuted for crimes, held in prisons. They are subject to the legal system of the United States. So pretty much every constitutional scholar that has looked at this has said absolutely the fuck not. The 14th Amendment is abundantly clear that anyone born in the territorial United States is a citizen. Trump also claims that the United States is the only country that has this. It's not true. Plenty of other countries do this. But I think he's going to make a try for it. And with a very conservative Supreme Court that's, already indicated they're willing to capitulate to a lot of the whims of Trump, who's to say? Who's to say?
Yeah, exactly. It is very concerning, but onto something else that's very concerning, healthcare.
Yes.
And that was a beautiful switch from me. The system's been in the news a lot recently. We've had the killing of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, and we'll come to that a little bit later on in the show. But what did Trump say his plan? Sorry, his concepts of a plan was going to be for healthcare in the US. What does he want to do?
Obamacare stinks. That's No, he still doesn't have a well-formulated plan on how to tackle healthcare disparities, prescription costs, everything we're going to talk about later in the show within the country. I think, he claims that he saved the Affordable Care Act, dubbed by Republicans as Obamacare, during his first term. That's not true. His administration repeatedly attempted to overturn Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, because I shouldn't use Republican phrasing to describe this kind of thing.
Sure.
But if listeners recall, that was the really infamous vote that failed because John McCain walked up into the Senate chamber, went up to the clerk, and did his, infamous, thumbs down. He voted against the Obamacare repeal, and the law stayed in effect. But Trump's administration still, through, the executive branch and through kind of mandates that they issued, gutted a lot of important mandates within Obamacare. So he still doesn't actually have a plan. I think if we were to say, well, what does the administration plan to do about healthcare? It seems that the most well thought out, for lack of better phrasing, plan that they have is to let Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy take a machete to Medicare and Social Security as part of their, government efficiency, whatever bullshit that is. But that's not going to improve the healthcare system for patients. What it's going to do is save the government money, and not a lot of money, to be clear, by cutting programs, benefits, and limiting eligibility for these social safety net programs. That's sort of the most clear healthcare proposal we have, and we're already seeing Republicans use this like deceptive little phrase that like, oh, we should really look at Medicare and Social Security to make sure that the people that actually need or actually deserve those benefits are the ones getting them. They're alleging that there's a ton of like Medicare and Social Security fraud, and that people who aren't supposed to be getting benefits from these programs are getting benefits. So I think we will see some efforts to tamp down on who is eligible for these social safety net programs.
As we say, we're going to talk about health a little bit later, but just one more question on this for you, Nikki. And I want to take your journalist hat off for a second and put your American citizen hat on for 1 second. When you hear that the president-elect says that there are concepts of a plan for something as serious and important as healthcare, I mean, that's concerning as an American citizen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And not to beleaguer the point, but we will talk about this more in depth later. But the brokenness of the American healthcare system is one of the only truly bipartisan issues in this country. It is really one of the only issues that Democrats, leftists, independent, liberals, right-wing freakazoids agree on.
Yeah.
That the American healthcare system is broken. And, you know, especially in the aftermath of the pandemic, it's really brought into relief just how dysfunctional this system is. And and it's like, to be clear, this is a bipartisan problem. I don't even think it's just like Republicans. Both Democrats and Republicans are so bought into the idea or like the principles of like corporate governance that our systems now work more in favor, particularly when it comes to healthcare, for corporations than actual patients, that for a president to come in and not, in this moment in time, and just kind of be like, I have vague ideas, concepts of a plan. I mean, for me, it should have been a disqualifying moment as a voter, but clearly it wasn't for a lot of people. And if Democrats were smart, they would just be harping on this 24/7.
Yeah, right. Journalist hat back on now. Back in the game. Just to finish off this section, there's a lot that we could talk about with this interview. They got into quite a lot, and we've not even mentioned NATO. But I guess, you know, we have to be rounded and we have to be fair. Was there anything in this interview that perhaps sounded like a good idea, sounded like he knew what he was talking about and could fill the shoes of being president?
I mean, the one thing that really stuck out to me is protecting the Dreamers sounds like a great idea. That is something that I would be totally behind if Republicans actually made a good faith effort to provide a pathway to citizenship for the Dreamers, who've been waiting on this since like the Obama administration. But again, he promised to do that in 2016 and didn't do shit, so my hopes are not high. It was also very nice to hear him pull back on the retribution talk. But again, if you weigh that against everything he said and everything the people around him who are coming into his cabinet have said about wanting revenge and being prepared to exact it, and still believe him, hello, my name is Nikki, I'm the wallet inspector, please show me your wallet. Like, no.
And then just finally, I guess, as I say, there was so much that was mentioned in this interview, too much to go into detail in one half an hour section. But what are we taking away from this interview most? What are we taking away from how Trump is going to run the country for the next 4 years, which I'm still not used to saying, but I have to get used to it. What are we taking away most from this interview, basically?
My biggest takeaway, and I think I will be proven correct in the predictions I've made previously on this show, is that he's going to fall back a lot on his cabinet picks and administration appointees. I really do believe that his biggest priority in getting elected was not necessarily governance, but escaping the many criminal trials and probes that were surrounding him. He has no interest in actually crafting and executing policy. And now that he's in office, it seems really clear that he's offloading the concepts of the plans onto the people around him.
Look, I'm not going to pretend I fully understand the Electoral College, but what I can say is that it's obviously a cause for contention amongst American voters. According to Pew Research, only a third of Americans are in favor of keeping the system, and Trump claims the Democrats want all future presidential elections to be based exclusively on the Electoral College.
Latif Nasser is the host of Radiolab from WNYC Studios and says that the system is absurd. He joins us now on American Friction. Hi, Latif.
Hi, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I'll start. Britt here. The Electoral College is quite confusing for anyone who hasn't grown up with that system. So for listeners who don't fully understand it, and I wish you best of luck here, could you sum it up for us?
Sure. And to be fair, I grew up in Canada. I'm a Canadian. Like, I came here. I also did not understand it. So I had to. I was kind of coming from the position that you are. Like, I was like, what is this thing? Why is this so complicated? Why is what is arguably the most important election on the planet this like kind of like it almost feels opaque and arbitrary, and it just feels so confusing. So I was kind of coming from the same place you are.
Yeah.
Do you want a kind of a nutshell version, or you want the whole history?
Let's go for the nutshell.
Okay, the nutshell is that basically from the very beginning, when this country was founded, the one thing that all the founding fathers agreed on is we don't want a king, but we need someone in charge. How are we going to do that? At the time, having the people of the country elect the president wasn't feasible. There was no mass media. This is the 18th century. It didn't make sense. So they kind of came up with this whole other route, this whole other mechanism called the Electoral College. It's not a school. College is just like a group of people with a shared mission. Basically, it's literally a whole kind of a part of the government that's only job. It sort of pops up when there's a presidential election. It votes for the president, and then it kind of dissolves. Like it literally just has one job, and that's what it's for. So they came up with this sort of this alternative that at the time really did make a lot of sense. And in it were a lot of negotiations about math and ratios and who should have how much say. But essentially that's sort of how it was. And then basically it got hijacked by partisan politics and now has a kind of inertia, has a kind of sticking power that is really, really hard to change.
It seems as though if you look at the data that exists now, and actually for quite a while, and I think you've spoken about this, and we'll get to this later, in the 60s and 70s, but it seems as though a lot of Americans don't want this system. So why is it still there, and what does it offer that other systems don't?
Well, it's sort of grandfathered in is, I think, probably the real answer to that. But it is true. Like, basically, since polling has started, like modern polling since the 1940s, like more people in this country have wanted to amend or abolish the Electoral College than have wanted to keep it the same way. And yeah, the real thing it has is it's grandfathered in. It has staying power, in part because to change it, you have to change the Constitution. And to change the Constitution, you need a lot of buy-in from a lot of people, including people whom this current system favors and benefits. So you kind of have to convince a certain subset of people. It sort of changes over time, but you have to convince a certain people to vote against their self-interest.
Let's start there. Who does the system favor within the American political sort of ecosystem?
Broadly, I mean, broadly it favors smaller states. There's sort of a thumb on the scale for smaller states. There are certain people over time who have made arguments that certain minorities, especially in swing states, get a disproportionate amount of power. So I would say those two are sort of the classically and also kind of historically like Southern segregationists, like those are sort of I would say those are the biggest beneficiaries of the Electoral College system.
And then, as Chris mentioned, there were unsuccessful efforts in the 60s and 70s to abolish or reform the system. What were the proposed changes to the Electoral College that were brought forth at the time, and why did they fail?
So the solution, or the proposed solution in the 70s was basically abolish it. Go to popular vote. Like, just, it's so simple. There's such a simple alternative here, right? Just like thumb up, thumb down for everybody. Like, just vote for who you want to be president and then count up all the votes and the winner wins. Like, it could be that simple. So the person who proposed that was this very young, they called him the Kennedy of the Midwest. He was a young senator from Indiana. And he basically, he was the one person, he was the head of the Constitutional Amendment Subcommittee in the Senate. So he was actually the person who had already amended the Constitution, which is like kind of the hardest thing you can do in government. He had already done it. And so it really looked like it had a shot. He passed it in the Congress. He had the approval of the then president, which was Nixon. He had approval from multiple, presidents. He had, it was something like, at the time, 80% of the public were in favor. Like, it looked like it really, really might happen. But what happens is he sort of he takes two rounds, and the first round, what happens is he's right on the edge. He's basically he's battling over less than 10 votes in the Senate, probably something like 6 votes in the Senate, and what he needed is President Nixon's help to kind of because Nixon had come out in favor of popular vote, even though he had been the beneficiary, even though he had been elected by the Electoral College. Nixon came out and said, okay, because it was such a landslide in Congress, Nixon came out and was like, okay, let's go, popular vote. And so this guy, Birch Bayh, this, guy who was spearheading the effort, he needed Nixon's help to kind of whip some of those Senate votes for him. But then what happened was there was this sort of side fight where Nixon was putting up these Supreme Court nominees that this guy Birch Bayh couldn't abide. They were people who were sort of unfit. One guy was corrupt. Another guy was racist. They basically were like, he was like, I can't do that. So he basically, sort of despite himself, he picked a fight with Nixon, who is the one guy who could help him pass it. So it sort of undid the whole effort. That was the first time. And the second time, the thing that undid it was paradoxically, a group of people who had been this guy Birch Bayh's ally throughout the civil rights movement, which was not all, but some African-American civil rights groups, like the National Urban League. And they basically were like, look, like if you, and you can see it from their perspective, again, self-interest, like it makes sense. If you were to swap the electing of the president to a popular vote, these black groups were like, look, we will have, 10%, not even, of the say of who gets elected in this country, who gets elected president. But if you keep it this way with swing states and electoral votes and da-da-da-da, we have a disproportionate say in who's going to win New York or who's going to win Georgia, or who's going to win, whatever these states were that were swing states at the time. They were like, look, we have a disproportionate say there. So kind of net, we have more power under this system, so we're going to keep it. And so they lobbied all the Senate, and this bill died a second time. This constitutional amendment died a second time.
As I said in the intro, Donald Trump has almost weaponized the Electoral College in a way by saying that Democrats want elections to be solely based upon the result from the Electoral College, which clearly isn't true.
Right.
But is it kind of quite strange that this system has kind of developed into a way of fighting against the opposition in a way. It was supposed to be something that was going to help, right?
Yeah.
And now it's become a weapon to fight off the opposition in a way.
Yeah, so this has happened in American history. The kind of thing that I think is the real pebble in the shoe of the Electoral College for most of the American public, especially recently, is what they call inversions, right? These moments where someone loses the popular vote but wins the electoral vote and becomes president, right? So that's what happened with George W. Bush. That's what happened with Donald Trump the first time around. The fact that kind of when that happened, especially two times so close together and both for the Republicans, that really kind of made it much more of a partisan issue than it had been prior. So, for example, in the 60s and 70s, when they were fighting this thing, it was a bipartisan issue. Reagan and Carter both said that they wanted to abolish the Electoral College, right? But now it's sort of gotten locked into this weird partisan grid, and Trump saying that the Electoral College already decides the winner. That's already how it works. It's sort of nonsensical. But the fact that the Democrats want that, it's actually there are a lot of people trying to change it. There's also there's a kind of a workaround almost. There's a way that people are trying to change it now without having to change the Constitution, because that's so hard. So they came up with this thing called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact or something like that. It's not a catchy name, but not at all. But basically it's a pledge that a bunch of states are making together, where they're like, because part of all of the problem of this is that from the beginning, the Constitution did not lay out how the states should give their electoral votes, and so everybody was jockeying around, and basically they settled on this way for totally partisan reasons, to go winner take all. So, which to me is actually the biggest flaw of the Electoral College, which is that if someone wins 50.1% of the votes in your state, 49.9% of the votes all of a sudden don't matter. All the electoral votes go to the one person. So that's sort of the situation right now. But this National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, the idea of that is these states are saying, look, we pledge to give our electoral votes to whoever wins the national popular vote, no matter who wins our state, which is a weird thing to say we're going to ignore even the majority of people in our state potentially and just give our electoral votes to whoever wins the national popular vote. But they only do it, this is the weird intricacies of this deal, they only do it, this compact, if enough of the states are going to do it that it will actually swing the whole election, that it'll actually decide the winner. If this is so forgive me if I've gone into the weeds here and this is so math complicated.
No, I just never heard of that. That's
yeah, it's like a weird, it's so funny because the whole system is so janky, and then there's this janky workaround to try to not have to change the Constitution because it's so hard. But that's kind of where we are. But right now, only Democratic states have signed on, and states where Democrats are in power have signed on for this interstate compact thing. So it doesn't really look like it's going to happen, but yeah, that's kind of where we are right now with efforts to overturn this without having to go the full whole hog to a constitutional amendment.
Speaking of janky workarounds, in 2020, see my great.
The American government has so many janky workarounds, right? Okay, yeah, sorry, keep going.
Oh, 100%. But speaking of janky workarounds, in 2020, we saw a sort of concerted plot from Trump and his allies in multiple states to usurp the Electoral College vote. And I think for a lot of Americans, that also exposed a vulnerability in the way the system can be exploited. And, the way I tend to look at these sort of attempted coup situations is if it can happen once, it can happen again.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm curious if in the aftermath of 2020, when all that went down, when the slates of fake electors were offered up, if there have been conversations about not necessarily even the need to abolish the system entirely, But how do you reform the laws so that someone who says, for example, well, I don't like that I didn't win this state, I'm just going to submit whoever the hell I want, is able to usurp the college as a whole?
Yeah. It's so hard to change because it's in the Constitution. That's the thing. Like, the American Constitution is particularly hard to change. And the idea of this, like the thing I was describing before, when they were framing the country, when they were starting the country, when they were figuring out how the president would get elected, like they made it a bank shot, right? It's like you're voting for someone who votes for the president. And it's in that indirect bank shot where games can happen, right? Like,
it's
so
almost
even,
like they wanted a parliamentarian system, but were so mad at the British they couldn't just implement a parliamentarian system.
Yeah, I don't know how do you, Chris? How do you feel about that claim? What do you think about that?
Fair enough. Fair enough. That's how I feel about it.
But yeah, like it is such a in that indirectness, like that's where kind of the ball can get. To use your analogy, like the ball can get intercepted, you know? And so what can we do? What can we do to prevent that from happening? Like, it's like, oh, well, we got to change this thing. We got to tweak this thing. And to do that, you have to change the Constitution. There is one change that has happened relatively recently. I think it was after 2020. I'm not sure. I need to check my date. But basically, so there's one thing that has happened, definitely has happened in the past, which is something called the faithless elector. So you know how there's the bank shot. So the bank shot is I'm voting for someone who then votes for the president kind of on my behalf, basically. But there have been times where, because that person who's called the elector, the Electoral College is a group of people called the electors. The elector, where they're just like, they take a pledge to vote the way that they said that you voted, that you want them to vote. But there have been times, many times, where those people are like, nah, I'm just not going to do that. I'm just not going to. I just don't feel like it.
Guy.
I don't like that guy, so I don't want to do that. And one of the, weirdly, this was a tiny nugget I found that I don't know why I was so amused by it. One of the people who did this was a guy who wrote some of the books and was an executive producer on the Little House on the Prairie TV show. Anyway, he was an elector somehow, and he just decided like, I don't want to vote for who I'm supposed to vote for. And he gave. He voted instead for the Libertarian ticket, and the Libertarian ticket had I think a woman on it for I think it was vice president, and so he actually gave the first woman an electoral vote by going rogue, basically. Anyway, total tangent, but there is now a kind of a rule. I think it was a law, or maybe it was a court thing. I have to look this up, but basically now. There's a kind of like you can get a slap on the wrist, basically. There's like a fine.
A slap on the wrist.
Yeah, there's like a fine if you decide to not vote for who you pledged to vote for. But it's like you're like, that doesn't seem like that's going to solve the problem here. It seems like there's a bigger problem here that we need to reckon with. As you say, that is like a coup prevention level problem.
Yeah. No, and we have seen like a couple Democratic state attorney generals go after people who were involved in the 2020 fake elector schemes. But again, all the DAs who brought charges were Democrats, and it's on a very like state by state, we may not basis, which is
well, and this all has sort of just snapped into the partisan politics machine, right? Yeah. Like and that was to me what was so clarifying about doing this story. It was about the 60s and 70s, because like at that time, everyone could see, like, that was as turbulent a time, as partisan and sort of tender a time as is now, right? Like, the president was assassinated. Like, there were so many things that happened in the sort of 60s and 70s, and it was like kind of there was a bipartisan idea of like, oh yeah, we probably should fix this system where it's possible that the person who gets the most votes doesn't become president. Like, that could be a problem. Both sides acknowledge that, right? And just now we're not in that place where like not everybody can acknowledge that.
I'm trying to wrap my head around it all.
Have I helped explain confusing. At all? I'm so confusing.
No, 100. Oh no, of course you have.
Yeah, no, you have.
Well, the other thing I was thinking of is, you know, there's for decades now been talk about making territories like DC, where I live, and Puerto Rico states. And the counter argument that Republicans tend to present when those conversations come up is, no, it's never going to happen because those two additions would probably give Democrats like a majority, if not a super majority in the Senate. Republicans would never be able to pass anything again, blah, blah, blah. But I'm also curious what the calculation is there for like the Electoral College system. If that opposition to adding more states for like people who might, like myself, who don't have a representative in Congress, how that relates in itself to the Electoral College. And this may just be a bad question.
No, like to me, I think like your framing of your question is very pragmatic and it's right. Like it's like what will happen? Yes, that will happen. The number of representatives they have in Congress, that's how many, plus the number of senators that they get if they are states, that will be how many electoral votes they will have. That will get factored into the math. That probably will, one assumes but can't be sure, but that probably would benefit the Democrats. So to answer your question, that would help the Democrats. But the fact that like, this is a democracy. Like people should all have votes that count for the person who represents them. Like that it shouldn't be a partisan game that you have to kind of like game it out. Like it's like people should just have votes and the votes should matter. And it shouldn't be that if I am a Republican in California or a Democrat in Idaho, like my vote like never really matters. Like that seems wrong. It just seems wrong. And it seems counter to the spirit of the idea of the founding of the country, you know?
Yeah. All right, Latif, any final thoughts on the Electoral College and its future?
It's a janky system. Like it made so much sense at the time when they came up with it. But
yeah, when you rode horses to DC to deliver the results.
That's right. That's right. And now it's like, and now it sort of is coasting by on just the people who it benefits voting for it, even though it doesn't even always for sure benefit them in the long run, you know?
God, what a time to be alive.
Right?
Latif, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Latif.
Appreciate it. Chris, next time I promise I'll properly explain this whole thing to you and you will get it.
Oh, you could explain it to me perfectly and it'd still go over my very
The European mind cannot comprehend this.
Well, I apologize. And thanks for having me.
Right, let's round up some more stories before we leave you. Coming back to healthcare, we said we were going to talk about it, and now we are. The US healthcare system has been thrust under the spotlight of late with the reported targeted killing of Brian Thompson, who was the CEO of United Healthcare. You've probably seen this all over the news, but Nikki, let's unpack this a little bit. First of all, what is United Healthcare? And it's been in a bit of controversy for quite a while. What is that controversy all about?
So, United Healthcare is a insurance company. It is the largest health insurance company in the United States. It is part of United Health Group, which is a massive medical and healthcare conglomerate in the United States. Brian Thompson was the CEO specifically of that insurance division. The thing listeners need to understand about healthcare in the United States is that it is a privatized, for-profit system. Health insurance companies make their profits by denying and limiting what care their customers, because they are customers, have access to. Now, these problems are not limited to United Healthcare. But United Healthcare is particularly notorious. Under Thompson, the rate of prior authorization denials at United Healthcare increased from 8% to 32%, almost double the industry average. For you Brits who have like public health insurance, who can walk into a hospital and get treatment, you might not know what prior authorization is. Prior authorization is this thing that healthcare insurance companies created where, let's say your doctor says, you need this surgery, or you need this medicine, or chemotherapy because you have cancer. Before you can actually receive that treatment, your doctor has to send your care plan to the insurance company, and the insurance company gets to decide if you're actually sick enough to get that treatment, or if that treatment is too expensive, or if there's another treatment that they'll be willing to pay for because it's cheaper. Essentially, it gives insurance companies veto power over treatments recommended by doctors to their patients. It's an insane thing. Last year, United Healthcare was sued because it had started using AI software to deny insurance claims, and the software was alleged to have a 90% error rate. That's the other thing. In the United States, a lot of times when you go to the hospital or to a doctor or get a treatment, your insurance company may not necessarily automatically bill it. You have to, get a billing statement from whatever medical service provider you went to, send it to your insurance company as a claim and be like, hey, I think you should pay for this. And then your insurance company should be like, actually, no. Like, sucks to suck. Again, this is also like an industry-wide problem, and this shit kills people. It shortens their lives, can leave them permanently disabled, or just without necessary medical treatment that they were prescribed by their doctors and should be entitled to. Medical debt is the number one cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States, and it's largely because we live under a for-profit system that inherently cares more about its bottom line and stock prices than the outcome for customers. And I'm going to keep saying customers because health insurance companies like to talk about patients. These aren't their patients. They are their clients. Patients go to doctors.
One of the things that stands out most for me, and listeners can go and look at the prices for this, is insulin. Mm-hmm. The price of insulin to treat diabetes in America is extortionate compared to any other country in the world. It is just off the charts. And I spoke to a woman in DC when I was reporting there, who literally she was rationing her insulin because she simply couldn't afford it, and because she was rationing that insulin, it was causing her a lot of harm to her body anyway, and essentially she was running out of money for this insulin, and it was just a horrible kind of situation where she was almost having to choose between life and death. And it just feels to me that is such a horrible situation and an unnecessary situation that is caused by, as you say, privatization and treating people like customers rather than actual people. And I guess my question to you here is, how deep does this anger really run within society? And I guess has this killing of Brian Thompson brought this to the forefront yet again, because we've seen it even in the UK right across the headlines. And also, how important is it for Trump to really target this head on? I doubt he will, though, really.
Yeah, like we were saying at the beginning of the show, it's absolutely absurd that Trump is coming into office and can't offer a single concrete proposal to help better the healthcare system. Our friend of the pod, Ro Khanna, gave an interview recently where he essentially said the thing we should be looking at if we can't get public healthcare for all is start passing laws that make it so that anything that's covered by Medicare, which is the one form of like public health insurance we have in this country, it's for like older people, retirees, you have to like pay into it throughout your life, and then you get it when you're really old. Anything covered by Medicare should be covered by insurance companies. Like those kinds of laws that are pretty, logical, they don't stir the partisan divide as much as, Medicare for all. The fact that Trump can't even point to something like that and say, this is something I can do to make the health system better, like, again, it's disqualifying to me. Wasn't to voters, but it's disqualifying to me. Like I said, I think part of the reason we saw such a strong, often unsympathetic reaction to Thompson's murder was because anger at the U.S. healthcare system is one of the only true bipartisan issues in this country. Everyone, if they haven't themselves had a bad experience with their health insurance company, there is a, like, 99% chance that you know someone, a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, an uncle, who had a terrible experience trying to get care in this country. I come from a family of celebrated individuals with debilitating back problems. And I know it's in my future. But I've seen how my dad, my uncles, my relatives who have back injuries from their work or other types of stressors struggle to this day to get appropriate medical treatment for something that actually makes their lives harder. And murder is bad. We can all agree on that. Murder.
Clearing that up.
I am clearing it up. No, I am adding my caveat. But if murder is bad, then knowingly denying people life-saving care, tacitly sentencing them to death or disability to make yourself money is also bad. When a society is so unhealthy, both physically and civically, that a vigilante assassination is widely celebrated as a blow to the system, then maybe you should take a look at why people are so angry at that system, why people feel that that system has failed them and that they are powerless to combat it through existing legal channels. That is, I think, the crux of the American reaction to Thompson's murder. The private healthcare industry spends billions of dollars lobbying lawmakers in the Capitol, in campaigns, and those lawmakers, for decades now, have been more focused on protecting corporate interest than bettering the material conditions of their constituents. And again, it's not about Democrats or Republicans. That is a bipartisan rot that is not just limited to healthcare. It shows up in the energy sector. It shows up in education. It is a principle that we should absolutely find a guest who can talk to people about Citizens United, because it might be the most consequential Supreme Court case in the last century of American politics. The way corporations are allowed to influence politics for their own financial gain is probably, in my view, the primary cause of so many of these systemic issues that are plaguing the American citizenry. And lawmakers need to find their fucking balls. Like, that's really it. I'm sorry. This makes me mad. This entire topic makes me so angry.
No, it completely makes sense. And I guess that's, that anger is also fueled when Trump says he has concepts of a plan, when this is a situation that is so serious and runs so deep and into so many different sectors.
Especially to give that interview like a week after this case it like became the national focal point that it was. Like, the fact that he couldn't sit down for 30 minutes with his advisors and be like, we're definitely going to get a question about healthcare. What should I say? Like,
yeah. But I guess also that also leads into the line that Trump doesn't know what his policies are, which we spoke to Philip Bump a long time ago on this podcast and said that Trump he's not a policy guy. And he really isn't, because he should really have policies on things like healthcare that are so serious. And he should have a plan, not just concepts of a plan. But he does have a plan for one thing, moving on, and finally. And that is a plan for Carrie Lake. She's been nominated by Trump to head up the U.S. Agency for Global Media. She had a long career in TV. I don't want to say successful because I'm not sure. Maybe
she was like a local news anchor in Arizona.
Right.
Yeah.
But she's had a career in TV. So maybe you'd be forgiven for thinking that this might be a good move. He's appointed someone who actually has experience within the sector that he's appointing them to. But that's not really the case here, is it, Nikki?
What this essentially will do is turn the U.S. Agency for Global Media turn a diplomatic resource into, well, it kind of already is state propaganda because it is a state agency, but explicitly right-wing Trumpian propaganda. It's also a bit of a concession prize for Lake. She's been incredibly loyal to Trump. She continues to be a die-hard defender of the myth that the 2020 election was stolen from Trump. She also claimed that her own elections were stolen from her. I mean, yeah, this, like you said, this agency does supervise Voice of America, and the Office of Cuba Broadcasting, which broadcasts pro-America content in Cuba. But yeah, it's, you know, it's installing a loyal propagandist into the propaganda arm of the State Department. I think it's also indicative of other more concerning things that Trump wants to do in relation to broadcasting. We know he hates NPR, National Public Radio, which receives a lot of federal funding. I think if he's looking to install this type of person in positions where he already is able to exert that influence, I think it is a bit of a warning bell for, you know, the things he's going to do at the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. So, you know, sirens.
Yeah, and it seems to me another way of appeasing that sector of politics, of appointing Carrie Lake into a position that she probably clearly wants. But it links in with, you know, any move that he's done to try and keep all sectors of the GOP on side. And I think that's kind of going back to Meet the Press and that interview, he talked about NATO and basically saying that Ukraine can expect less aid from the US. And that is very much playing into the hands of those within the GOP who wanted to pull back on the Ukrainian aid. Whether he wants to do that or not, it feels like an appeasement. And that's kind of what this Carrie Lake appointment feels like, and all the other very weird appointments that we've seen over the past weeks, or nominations, I should say. Sorry.
Can we talk about...
Say that again.
Can we talk about another weird appointment very briefly?
Absolutely, hit me.
Kimberly Guilfoyle?
Greece.
Yes, but do you want to know my conspiracy theory about this?
Well, tell us about this nomination and then tell us the conspiracy theory.
Yeah, so Kimberly Guilfoyle was appointed to serve as ambassador to Greece. She'll have to undergo Senate confirmation.
Big job.
Big job. Huge job. But but the thing is, Greece actually super important because the U.S. wants to maintain positive relations with Turkey. Greece is also it's one of the big Mediterranean allies that can sort of keep tabs on everything that's going on there. But my conspiracy theory is, for listeners who don't know, Kimberly Guilfoyle was the longtime girlfriend / briefly fiance, I think, of Donald Trump Jr. So they have reportedly broken up because Don Jr. is dating some new Florida socialite. He switched from thick plastic surgery woman to thin plastic surgery woman. But my conspiracy theory is that they're sending Kimberly Guilfoyle to Greece because they don't want to piss her off, because she probably has so much dirt on the Trump family that if it was just a nasty breakup and they let her go free, she can make a career out of talking shit about that family. That's my conspiracy theory. Please don't sue me for libel.
Please don't sue the podcast for libel either. We'd greatly appreciate that. But that brings us to hopefully not the end forever after that conspiracy theory, but the end of this episode of American Friction. Nikki, thanks very much for joining me.
Always a pleasure, Chris.
Thanks to me, Chris Jones. You're welcome, Chris Jones. And thanks to Jarv, and a very happy birthday to Jarv as well.
Happy birthday to Jarv.
Celebrating somewhere. He did tell me, but I've forgotten.
At an
Sorry,
undisclosed location.
Yeah, as I say, he's probably vampire hunting somewhere. He's obsessed with them. Anyway, you can support us. Please do, because it helps us keep this podcast going. You can do that by going to patreon.com/American Friction. And as a quick reminder as well, if you enjoy what we're doing and you don't have the means to support us financially, which we completely get, please do rate us and review us wherever you're listening to this show, whether it be Spotify or whatever platform that is. Thanks for listening. This has been American Friction.